Welcome to Our National Conversation, a podcast in which we discuss politics from all angles. We are completely nonpartisan, and all views, respectfully stated, are welcome here. Our podcast is unique in that it is hosted and run by students who are focused on finding solutions to the biggest problems facing America.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Danny, and welcome to ONC. Today is March 2nd, 2026, and we're here to talk about the bombing of Iran. This past weekend, Trump initiated a bombing to kill the current, what is he would consider dictator of Iran. But there were multiple casualties, and currently the country is at a divide in celebrating his death but also wanting retaliation on the U.S. We're here to talk about our thoughts today. Welcome to the podcast. So to get started, does anyone have any first, feelings they want to talk about regarding the news that just happened?
I'll start. I'm a little bit older than the rest of you guys. I know I don't look it, but it's true. And this whole Iranian story goes back a very long time. America fiddled around in Iran and helped bring about getting rid of a leader that we didn't like at the time. And then one thing led to the next, and the Shah of Iran got deposed by Ayatollah Khomeini. And then when Jimmy Carter was still president, he was president from 76 through 80. We had the Iran hostage crisis where the Iranians stormed the American embassy and took hold of 440, wait, I can't remember how many hostages. It was a lot, quite a big number, but they were held for like 440 days or something like that. It was a very tense time. Carter tried to send in a military expedition to extract the American hostages. It failed. A helicopter went down in the desert. People got burned alive. It was not a pretty scene. There's been a lot of anger towards Iran for many, many years. And so this weekend, as we all know, Trump ordered the bombing to get rid of the new Ayatollah, Khamenei, not the same as Khomeini. And I personally am going to say I'm hopeful. I'm knocking on wood here that this turns out to be a good event. I think there's been so much instability in the Middle East for so long, and Iran has been backers of all the troublemakers, whether it's Hamas or Syria or all the bad guys and um, Hezbollah. So maybe now we can get rid of all that and have 2 or 3 decades of peace. I'd sure like to see it.
Uh, I guess to challenge your thought there, just because I know that often after killing leaders, there can be a lot of rebellions and a lot of violence that actually tend to happen afterwards. Um, and with the campaign that Trump ran on, which was to be you know, starting getting the Nobel Peace Prize, and ending all wars, he's tended to have his fingers a little bit in for a lot of foreign affairs, whether it's the kidnapping of the president of Venezuela, talking about owning Greenland. Currently, a massive lead cartel leader was killed in Mexico with the help of the U.S. And they were dealing with violence down there. And now with the bombing of Iran, do you think he's fulfilling on those promises, or that it's going actually in a direction of peace, or do you think we are almost on a snowball effect of getting involved too much abroad rather than fixing our problems within our own country?
Well, the fact that he is breaking his campaign promises and going in a different direction seems classic Trump to me. I mean, he doesn't stick with any one position for very long, and he changes his positions on a daily basis. He also ran on releasing the Epstein files, and we saw what happened with that. Um, I don't know. I will say this about the guy, and there's a lot about him I really don't like. But he's taking on some of these issues that everybody has been punting on for decades. And, you know, we're finally dealing with some of these situations. And I don't know how it's all going to turn out, but it's interesting to see that we're finally actually doing something. you might not like him, but and people in Europe pretty much loathe him. But when he took over, NATO countries were spending less than 2% of their annual budgets on defense. Now they're all up to about 5% in order to try to fill in the gap. I mean, was the US going to be responsible for paying for Europe's defense forever? Well, it was tough. He's willing to make the tough calls. He's very brave and bold and brazen that way. Going after Maduro in Venezuela, he's not a good guy. The people down there are miserable living under him. Same with the people in Iran. I mean, a lot of people there are cheering. Here in LA, we have a section of LA called Tarangelis. It's where a lot of the Persians escaped. They came here to get away from Ayatollah Khomeini, and they're thrilled with what's going on. So, I think we just have to give it some time to see how it really plays out. It's hard to predict how it will play out.
Yeah, because I know people are talking about how there's currently two sides to media, and one side is showing that people are celebrating his death and have been waiting for this day, whereas another side is showing that those that support the Iranian government are very upset and are preaching death to America. And I mean, with the UAE kind of having some more affiliations, uh, not with Iran. Qatar was just bombed by Iran as well in retaliation. So I think it's interesting to see kind of how if this is going to lead to a peaceful place or not, just because as much as everyone does not like this guy for example, I know they live or a lot of like let's say women's rights are completely different there than in the US. It's hard to defend a government and a regime that functions off the way it does when it treats women, but it's almost that are we willing to risk the later effects, like possibly sending American soldiers off to war again and whatnot for another country's government that was not coming anywhere near ours? How do you feel about that?
I'd like to jump in. Um, I don't feel great about it, but the unsaid truth is every so many years, I don't know if it's a decade, a generation, or whatever, um, troops have to be involved in some type of conflict. Otherwise, they lose their value and knowledge. And then when the older people retire, all the young people are kind of really, really untrained. I think that actually involves, I don't know if it's North Korea or South Korea right now, like some of their troops. So they're lending themselves out to another country or something like that based on some timeline, either today or in 10 years, we'd be somewhere anyway, just to maintain that battle readiness excuse for better or for worse. But that's how I feel about that.
Dave, I think it would be worthwhile for you to tell people about your own military experience. You speak with some authority here.
Two tours in Iraq. So I think between 2006 and 2008, like Kuwait, Ramadi area, all that stuff. I think Iraq at the time population was about 32 million people, but a lot of desert, not much grass. A lot of people whose industry is um, herding sheep or something like that. So sometimes, depending on the area, their sons and daughters sometimes went to school. Obviously, as they get older, women didn't have as many opportunities. So people not interested in war and battle just want their kids to kind of grow up safe, things like that. But outside of that, the Middle East mainly or mostly doesn't have structures like we do, like laws, policies, books, libraries, authoritative figures. So when one bad dictator gets put out of his misery and someone replaces him or her, it's not much to fall back on outside of their word in real time, just because they don't have a lot of that architectural um, procedural law history like us in some other countries. So it's tough to really build the whole country up in a first class or sorry, first world method, sort of. So it's sort of just flying by the seat of their pants just because they don't have the history of doing things by the book, because there is no book.
While David was talking, I checked into my AI to get my facts right. There were 66 Americans taken hostage in 1979. Several of them were let go along the way, and 52 remained for a total of 444 days in captivity. They were allowed out on January 20th, 1981, which just happened to be the day President Ronald Reagan was sworn in.
Wow, yeah, because I mean, a lot of this is kind of before my time, right? Because I was only born in '02, so I have not been, I guess, um, uh, you could say knowledgeable or present for a lot of events, current events with or the long conflict that has been going on with Iran. I know currently for me being a young person, having friends in military and kind of just being in the idea of wartime is a bit frightening. I was told growing up, you are growing up in during wartime because we had so many people in the Middle East. We had our military deployed in the Middle East after 9/11, but I couldn't really grasp that as a young kid who was born after 9/11. That didn't make sense to me that people were away. But kind of seeing military come back and speak out on that and um, the traumas of that and kind of the US implementing itself a bit more than it should have been into affairs because I know that there was even talk about how the the first tours that went out of military, it was actually much more peaceful, and then as it progressed, more and more troops were being killed, um, like less troops were coming back. Uh, Dave, I don't know if you have any more kind of conversation on that exactly, but is there a way we can go about if we do have to have military presence in Iran and we will be possibly entering war with them? What are your possible hopes, or what's the best strategy to go to prevent casualties, the most casualties? And
Um, Iraq and Afghanistan was I know the first year or two, something like that was like I forgot Operation something. So like get in and do the main mission. And after that, it lasted so many years, it evolved into enduring freedom. So like helping the people and more than just taking out bin Laden. So I imagine it would be the same type of thing in Iran. But since Iraq and Afghanistan is still fresh all over social media and what happened, like everyone kind of knows the playbook. Also, that the gear, the body armor, the trucks, all that stuff, if people go over there, American soldiers aren't used to those elements and wearing all that armor. So unfortunately, there will be casualties. I don't know if there will be more than Iraq and Afghanistan, but um, it won't be anything that the country is happy about.
yeah, and I have to ask you this if this is something that kind of reigns true because I've been seeing this on social media as people have joked that I know people are trying to make light of the situation that we might be going to war. And someone posted a clip of them getting crab dinner, which is not a normal thing. It was military personnel, and it's kind of the joke that you get a really, really nice food before you're kind of set into combat zones. I don't know if this rang true to you, but everyone else in the comments, there was somebody from the Air Force being like, "Yeah, we got seafood boiled tonight before going out." So I don't know if that's something you possibly experienced or if that reigns true at all.
Before getting to the danger zone countries, you usually have a layover in Kuwait or I don't know so much Germany anymore, something like that. But that's like the non, what's it called? Maybe they take fire occasionally, but it's not bad most of the time. So their meals are better. So it kind of gives you like a lull. And then it's like, well, in 2 days we're going. So yeah, so like for 48 hours there's a bit of a um dystopia sort of. So yeah, you're right.
That's funny because just because people are like, "Oh no," I just thought that was a funny thing to bring up and get maybe clarification.
Oh yeah, great food. Then
Something,
MREs for like a year. So
yeah, great.
Just for those who don't know what an MRE is, why don't you explain that one, Dave?
MRE meal ready entree. So it's like this faded brown bag that's probably good for like 5 years. The old ones going back to World War II or whenever. I think they used to contain cigarettes and some other stuff. Now it's usually coffee, or M&Ms or Skittles sometimes, and then the flavors vary from like veggie burger to spaghetti and meatballs, jambalaya, chicken manicotti or something like that, beef stew. Um, and then a lot of them have these shakes in them that you're not really supposed to mess with because if you're on a patrol and you had one of those, um, you might be looking for a bathroom at some point. But yeah, they're trying to get better with them. I'm sure a lot of people would love to see the cigarettes come back, but they phased that out. I don't know, well before my time.
Yeah, I'm honestly surprised that there hasn't been a insane class action lawsuit against maybe some of the five food that's been preserved for 5 years still somehow still edible. Um, yeah, and then I wanted to talk about another internet trend that's been people are talking about, kind of targeted at people who had voted for Trump. People are saying, joking that if there is a draft or something, the first people that should be at the front lines are those who voted for Trump. Um, do you feel that this possibly goes against the American principle of like having the freedom to vote and um, kind of like that you have to actually follow through? That if you voted for this person, you have to be the first to sacrifice on their decisions when Trump went back on th promises he said and switched up things he said he was going to do. Like I said he wasn't going to get involved in foreign affairs and wars. This is kind of beginning of one. What do you think as that being a public response? Mostly, I would say of Gen Z of if you voted for Trump, you're going to the front lines. What would you say? What would you say in response uh, to that, and how and if that encourages um, a good uh, like a good democracy or not?
Does anyone else want to answer first? I don't want to hog
Yeah,
all the
no, I'll hog a little bit. First of all, I don't know how you would enforce that. It does seem contrary to free speech or freedom of the vote. Um, but I do think that if you're a young Trumpster who voted for Trump, you ought to be more inclined to run to the front of the line and enlist. But actually, enlistments are up right now. You know, Trump has had an effect on young people who are pro-America and want to save America and want to join the military to do that. So I think the military right now is probably in about as good shape as it has been in a long time. I will go back to the olden days again. Back in 1972 or 3, Richard Nixon was president and he was leading the Vietnam War, which was very unpopular. And we had a draft and everybody had to sign up for it. And there were a lot of deferments and ways to escape it. For rich people, especially, they could keep going to school forever and keep deferring. Poorer people from the South and lower socioeconomic classes tended to be the ones who got drafted and sent over to Vietnam. It was a very bloody conflict. A lot of people didn't come home alive. A lot of people came home very shot up. And the draft was so unpopular that it really uh, pushed young Americans to protest in the streets in a very dramatic way. And it was scary to the country. And Nixon, he was a very clever politician. He came up with this thing called the lottery system, and every male 18 years old or older was given a number that corresponded to his date of birth, and it was like a lottery. They picked numbers out of a bingo drum, and I got a very high number. I got 272. Anybody of that age will remember to this day what number they got, and they said that they were only going to get up to about a number 100, and then after that, you were probably okay. So I felt very okay. And frankly, I think it took a lot of the steam out of the protest. You know, a lot of the young men said, well, I'm okay now. I don't have to worry about this anymore. It wasn't a happy situation. And I think the volunteer army is the better way to go.
Yes, because just like you said, I think that's something we're currently dealing with in the country when it comes to protest is, like you said, it only went up to a certain number and you had 272, so you didn't get as worried about it anymore, and it deterred protest. I guess it's people in a position kind of like, oh well, let's say that this draft I guess doesn't affect me anymore, so I'm not going to participate. Um we can bring in the element too of women could now be drafted and stuff. So I feel like protests could be a lot bigger in the country if we were to get anywhere near a draft. Um, just because then then you are facing a bigger party of people that might backlash war. What are your thoughts on that? Kind of because now that I guess it would affect a bigger demographic, more people might retaliate to the idea of war in the fear that they would be sent to go.
Actually, and this kind of goes way out there a bit. The idea of an imposed draft would be so interesting because, like Jeff said, there are certain ways back then and even today you can get out of a draft. One is medical. So many things are made up today by doctors just so that they can treat it. So they make up a diagnosis so they can give you a pill or whatever forever. So I can imagine so many people having mountains of paperwork that just say, I think it's called like cervalgia or all that stuff, which really literally means neck pain. So that's not anything. But now you have these military screeners trying to look through all your medical to see if you can actually go or not. So that kind of gets into is this person really injured or do they have, are headaches an actual thing or a migraine's really a serious headache? So that's a bit different, but I could see that happening with a lot of people trying to, get out. Or I'm on an inhaler. Can I send this person? Or
Yeah, and you don't know with the mental health issues people can claim today, and like putting a gun in a mentally ill person's hand is a bit terrifying.
oh
Um,
yeah, anxiety. Sorry to cut you off, but yeah, all that stuff actually goes on in the military too. I can't say too much, but some people things are said, and we know this person might not be joking, so their weapon has to be taken away, and things like that. So that is a real thing that goes on.
yeah, and then our and then I guess what does everyone because I know it doesn't seem like a draft could be real, but I think why a lot of people might be a little bit worried too is because of who Iran supplies oil to, a big portion of that going to China and wanting to not let the US kind of have access to oil like that. What do we think China's response is mostly to the current bombings and whatnot, and what actions they might take? Is that on anyone's mind?
I could kind of jump in on this one. So, okay, yeah, I think, how am I saying? Okay, so it ties into what you were definitely saying about like the oil and global energy, but a lot of people focus not just on like the US and Iran, but it affects like a lot of other major players as well, like how you mentioned China. But China has obviously been one of Iran's like biggest oil consumer, and because a huge portion of Iran's oil has historically like flowed to China, they like obviously like discount it. Sometimes that could be like a little bit more transparent or not, but if this conflict kind of continues or it disturbs like the shipping through I think there's like a big deal for China, and a lot of China's like crude kind of imports that into the Middle East, I think. And if those like supplies definitely get like interrupted, it can really push the prices higher, and it'll like strain like honestly their economic and kind of like how their whole like manufacturing thing is. We've already seen how China publicly condemns that and strikes with a lot of violation and international norms, but they're also very like cautious of it. At least that I've noticed. I know Beijing doesn't want to be like dragged into that broader kind of conflict. And while they try to like balance its support from Iran while keeping their own like economic needs, I think that their like energy, like security concerns is more like in people's face. So if you were to like if I'm thinking how China's going to respond, it's a lot more complicated because they've definitely criticized the US and they want stability, obviously, in their region. But if we're watching on how this could like impact the oil market specifically and like the global trade, I think it's a lot bigger than just the politics of it. It's more about like where their own energy comes from and how like big of a disruption that it could go into like their economy.
I'm not wishing for this to happen, but the US now is so tied up in so many conflicts. We have Venezuela going, we've got uh, Iraq. I'm sorry, not Iraq, Iran. We just exited from Iraq and Afghanistan. We've had our hands full for a long time, and it seems to be accelerating, not slowing down. We were even talking about going into Greenland at one time. I mean, anyway, if I were the Chinese, I could see how it would be a very tempting time to go after the island nation of Taiwan, which is something they've wanted to do for a very long time. It was all one country at one point, and then Taiwan broke off and separated from China, and mainland China has always wanted to get it back. If they went in there now, I don't see how the US or anybody could defend against it.
Yeah.
I mean, well, we still have a bunch of troops and battleships, sitting in places. They might get a head start, but it's not like all of the US is thinking about Iran right now. Like, there's, I don't know if this is a good way to put it, or I don't know if there's a bad way to put it, but the US is so big military wise, it could almost fight wars with five countries at the same time. Well, at least manpower, fuel and logistics would probably create an issue, but I think there's definitely enough to kind of break off and focus on Taiwan if we had to.
What about Israel? Older Americans tend to be very pro-Israel. We always have been. We were just sort of raised that way. When the Palestinians did that thing a couple of years ago where they stormed over the border and grabbed all those people, killed people, raped people, etc. I mean, that was horrifying for a lot of older people. And we didn't understand why students on campus suddenly rose up in their pro-Palestinian protest mode. How are young people feeling about Israel now?
I could say for the perspective of someone my age is that, I mean, I actually have a lot of friends that families immigrated from the area, and they can attest from older relatives how awful, because Israel was established as its state and nation in, was it 1948? Am I getting
Eight.
that? Am I getting that right?
Yeah.
And so, this has been um under 100 years of their establishment. There's going to be disarray when something gets settled in like that. But the thing is Israel has had the backing of Western powers that's pretty strong, whereas Palestine has not really had the support and affiliation of the other countries around it. For example, other countries shutting their borders and entry, like Egypt, not letting really in Palestinians during this time. I think it was the idea that we knew that Israel was going to for one day of violence that Palestine did, Israel was going to crush them now for several years. And the massive casualties does not equate. And we kind of supported this decimation, onslaught, and violence for way too long. And I think our generation thinks it has a lot to do with kind of who Western ideals favors. Um, because in reality, Israel say like is um Israelis will say that this is our chosen land, but it's they were moved there, and a lot of them actually are not blood related, like firstborn people from Israel. There's a lot of them were European Jews that were brought back to Israel and whatnot. So, and whereas Palestine has been there in the way of the land. So I think it's just the fact that there was sides taken and an ideology taken kind of that made that influence so big. And so, and Israel gets our military support 100%. Like, and I think another irritation is how much of our tax money goes directly to Israel. It's an insane amount, and it's been for years with kind of, I mean, I know we established companies there and whatnot, and they have they can help extend our infrastructure, but they don't really benefit us in a lot of ways. But by being there, and I'm not saying their existence causes conflict, but you have to imagine if they are the only in this specific continent that is very like the same way us in the Western Hemisphere kind of favor Christendom, um, and in the Middle East they favor uh, the Islamic belief system. So if you are the one place out of all of that that it's going to endure conflict like that, it's a bit more difficult. Yes, there is still Christianity within those regions, but it's very sparring, and especially with Judaism being that small, um, it's bound to no conflict. And the thing is why did Europe need to establish somewhere for them to live? It's because Europe didn't want to let in Jews. This goes back to, I mean, my grandparents who were Irish immigrant families, kind of how they were treated in the U.S. as lesser than. Same were Jews. So it's like Europe moved them out of Europe to the Middle East because they didn't want to deal with them or really bring them in as a class, even though we had World War II to stop their genocide. And then once they kind of had the Western ideology backing within um, within the Middle East region, it gives them the ability to be the oppressors. Um, so I think it's just the conflict of the casualties that came out of the Palestine versus Israel that is really upsetting to a lot of people of our generation.
I think for speaking for like Gen Z, obviously, like I can't really put a name for everyone, but I know I used to go to a community college and we had people who would protest for Palestine constantly. And especially from like Gen Z's kind of lens, I don't think that we see it like a religious divide. Danny, you said it like pretty well, but a lot of young people kind of like frame it as a political and like colonial historic like history issue. There's a lot of young people that use like the tension into what kind of feels as like a consequence from the Europeans. I think Gen Z usually questions like the power structures a lot. And when one state has advanced like military kind of systems and they have like strong Western backing, they have a lot of like consistent funding as well. But young people instinctively constantly ask like, oh, who holds that kind of structure of power here? And it's less about denying like Israel right now to exist and more questioning like the policies that result in like a large scale kind of like civilian suffering issue.
Any predictions on how this is all gonna unfold?
I'd like to think it's going to die down in 2 weeks just because something else is going to pop up and distract us. Probably till we eventually forget about the Epstein files or whatever. I don't know. But yeah, I imagine with everything we're on like 2 week cycles. So
That would be hard to believe, but let's hope you're right.
I don't know. That's my
Yeah, I was gonna say, for with something that is new with our generation also is while we have way more access to information than you ever did at our age with the internet and whatnot. Sorry, Jeff, not to uh
It's okay.
flex the age gap, but I think it's also like Dave said, it's like the 2 weeks of different information. It's that we are so overloaded with different things going on and information that there's something new and popular discussed every 2 weeks. Um, if I'm going to be honest, I hope if there's anything we focused on the most, it's internal issues in America and kind of solving those and making sure those last and get solved rather than foreign affairs as much as I care about them, and think that they're important. I think us as a nation and in figuring out our own piece is more important, at the time being. So I'd hope that stay more relevant. Predictions wise, I don't think America is going to suffer from what the most recent decisions of bombings more than others might. I don't know how Israel is going to do, if it gets worse. And I don't know, like we said, we guessed with with currently kind of our fingers being in a lot of pies right now within foreign affairs, anyone could kind of retaliate and start and multiple things could start, and it'd be a fear of mine if we could juggle being involved in multiple foreign disagreements right now.
Danny, I think we've said everything we're smart enough to think of to say.
Yeah, I agree. Well, it's been amazing. Thanks everybody for coming to talk today. If anyone's watching, thank you for watching our podcast from ONC to you. Hope you tune in next time. Thanks.
This podcast was brought to you by Our National Conversation, a place where students generate policy solutions to the biggest problems facing America. Join us in freeing political dialogue from hyperpartisanship. To learn more about what you heard today, check us out at ournationalconversation.org. You can also follow us on social media at Our National Conversation to show your support and keep up with our latest efforts.